The 10th Cavalry charged Kettle Hill through barbed wire and Spanish gunfire. Yet Theodore Roosevelt erased them from the history books. 4 black regiments fought in Cuba in summer 1898. The 9th Cavalry, the 10th Cavalry, the 24th Infantry, the 25th Infantry. 2,000 black soldiers anchored America's 15,000 troops invading Cuba. They were career soldiers in a segregated, unforgiving United States Army. The 9th and 10th Cavalry had already built legends on the western frontier, fighting since 1866 on dangerous, brutal plains. Native fighters called them Buffalo Soldiers for blood and survival. By Cuba, these regiments had more combat experience than most white units. When America declared war on Spain in 1898, they deployed. They landed in Cuba, determined to prove their courage and worth. At Kettle Hill, they faced Spanish fire with complete determination. Their assault breached Spanish defenses when other units faltered. Yet their triumph was stolen, rewritten, and nearly forgotten by power. They advanced with weapons, and a legacy America wanted erased. Sergeant Major Edward Baker, Jr. enlisted in 1882, 16 years prior. By Cuba, he held the highest rank for black soldiers then available. He was not the exception among these regiments. He was the standard these soldiers held themselves to. 10th Cavalry soldiers stand in formation, coats pressed, posture exact. They understood everything they did was evidence for or against their entire people. That expectation traveled with them through every voyage and assault. The first test came before San Juan Hill, before the famous charge that history would remember forever. Las Guasimas, June 24, 1898. Spanish forces ambushed an American column in the jungle. Spanish soldiers held positions in hills above a narrow trail. Roosevelt's Rough Riders walked directly into that Spanish trap. The Rough Riders were the story newspapers had decided to tell. Wealthy volunteers, college men, a future president among them. Spanish fire from the ridge pinned down the American column. The 10th Cavalry shifted positions swiftly and laterally. Without waiting for any orders from commanders, their flanking movement broke Spanish positions and saved the Rough Riders. Roosevelt wrote about it immediately after the battle. His first letters credited the 10th Cavalry with preventing disaster. He documented that recognition in his own words. His memoir reduced their Las Guasimas role to minor detail. The soldiers who rescued his regiment from entrapment became secondary figures in his personal heroic narrative. But that shift came later. June's final weeks still belonged to the advance. The target was Santiago de Cuba, a prize that would demand everything. The Spanish held it behind a ring of fortified hills. San Juan Heights contained 2 essential objectives, San Juan Hill and Kettle Hill. Both demanded passage across open terrain under concentrated fire. July 1st, 1898. An estimated 521 Spanish riflemen held the high ground, armed with modern German-made Mauser rifles. Fast, accurate, and lethal at range. The open slopes offered no cover. The 10th Cavalry advanced toward Kettle Hill. The approach crossed a barbed wire fence that Spanish engineers had strung across the slope. Without cutting instruments, the soldiers used their hands. Leather gloves, calloused palms, bare skin pulling against barbed steel while rounds cut the air above them. They pulled the wire apart and kept moving. What happened next is not interpretation. Army after-action reports recorded it. The 10th Cavalry captured Kettle Hill's crest. The Rough Riders arrived after them. Several commanders present submitted written statements explicitly saying so. General Pershing, future Supreme Commander of American forces in the First World War, was on that hillside. He filed a military report. The black regulars fought as well as any troops he had ever seen. He was not writing for posterity. He was writing for the record. During the charge, Baker noticed a soldier fall into a stream, unable to swim. Enemy fire was ongoing. Casualties were accumulating around him. He went into the water anyway. He swam to the soldier and pulled him to the bank. That action would eventually earn him the Medal of Honor, one of 5 awarded to black soldiers for the Santiago campaign. 5. Single operation. Names that most Americans have never been told. By the afternoon of July 1st, American forces held San Juan Heights. The campaign for Santiago had effectively been decided. and reporters from New York and Boston were already writing their dispatches. The name that filled those dispatches was Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt made for good copy. He was wealthy, educated, loud, and politically connected. He had ridden mounted. He had gestured dramatically. The 2,000 black soldiers who had broken the wire flanked the ambush and reached the summit before him, a triumph the papers refused to print. Not in 1898. Not in American publications aimed at audiences who had already decided what black military participation looked like. So the dispatches focused on the Rough Riders. The black regulars received minimal mention, depicted at the edges as support. The Army's own records told a different story, one that would take decades to surface. In the weeks after the battle, Roosevelt gave interviews, wrote letters, and began shaping a public account. His narrative had specificity. It had momentum. It satisfied what readers preferred to accept. By 1901, Roosevelt was president. That same year, he published a revised account describing black soldiers as men who needed white officers to keep them steady under fire. This stood in direct opposition to what those soldiers had done on July 1st. Pershing's battlefield report challenged it directly. 6 additional military witnesses contradicted it through their own accounts. Roosevelt had access to those records. He had been on the Hill. He had seen the 10th Cavalry already breaching the fortifications when he arrived, too late to join them. His 1901 account was a deliberate choice, not a failure of memory. The article ran in Scribner's Magazine, a prestigious monthly read by educated, prominent Americans nationwide. It was the kind of publication that shaped what textbooks said a decade later. The claim that black soldiers needed to be steadied by white officers entered the educated American mainstream dressed in the authority of a sitting president and a decorated veteran. Most readers had no reason to question it, no access to the archive, no reason to know there was another version. There was another version. A 10th Cavalry sergeant named Presley Holliday submitted a publicly distributed statement to the New York Age in April 1899. He named specific actions. He named specific officers who had witnessed those actions. He contested Roosevelt's account with precise, unambiguous language. The letter exists. It has always existed. The New York Age was a black-owned paper with substantial influence among African-American readers nationwide. Scribner's declined to publish any rebuttal. Mainstream outlets ignored Holliday's objection entirely. A veteran who had been on the Hill called the president's account wrong, in print, with specifics. The contradicting evidence surfaced and stayed confined to a separate network from the falsehood. This is where the mechanism becomes visible. No documents were destroyed. No archive was raided. The strategy simply ensured the correction never reached the spaces where the original narrative circulated. Different publication, different readership, different economic reach, same effect as silence. Scribner's reached the editors who shaped textbooks. The New York Age reached communities whose histories were already being revised. Repetition at scale transforms a claim into accepted truth. Limited distribution keeps a story marginal. The correction needed the same resources as the original claim to compete with it. It never got them. Roosevelt understood those mechanics. He had spent years cultivating press relationships. His November 1898 gubernatorial victory had been built in part on the San Juan Hill narrative. By 1900, he was on the national ticket. By 1901, he was president. The narrative could not be revised without threatening the political structure built on top of it. So it was not revised. The 10th Cavalry's Corporal Wanton had also crossed open terrain during the July 1st engagement, reaching wounded men under active fire and pulling them back more than once. His Medal of Honor came only in 1899, after sustained pressure from officers who had witnessed the action firsthand. Without that pressure, it is unlikely the award would have been filed at all. The fact that pressure was necessary tells you something about the default. The default was silence. Baker returned from Cuba a veteran. No parade, no ceremony. His Medal of Honor arrived through bureaucratic process, treating extraordinary service as administrative routine. He wore the decoration in a country that had already decided who the hero of his battle was. He continued his service. His hands, the same hands that had pulled a drowning man from a river under Mauser fire, kept signing military paperwork. The country kept electing men who had built careers on the version that left those hands out of the story. By 1910, American educational texts had established their conventional narrative of the Spanish-American War. Roosevelt dominated. The black regulars appeared seldom and anonymously. 4 regiments, 5 medals of honor, 1 published soldier's objection. Curricula erased almost all of it, a silence that spoke volumes. In those same years, the 9th and 10th Cavalry continued serving in a segregated army. They had captured terrain that history would not credit them with. They returned to posts where they could not eat with white soldiers, could not be promoted past a certain rank. Each layer of official narrative that went down made the layer beneath it harder to reach. Holliday's letter remained in the archive, documented, time-stamped, factually sound. History kept moving in the other direction. Survival came through communities that refused to let the story disappear entirely. Black veterans organizations kept it in their own gatherings for decades. Descendants maintained the history by hand, passing what institutional education ignored. Surviving soldiers submitted accounts to black newspapers, wrote letters, gave testimony. They did not wait for the mainstream to correct itself. They built a parallel record, lower in reach, higher in accuracy. That parallel record is what historians eventually found. During 1971, historian Marvin Fletcher published research on the black regulars using declassified military records. That work reached scholars. Scholar Frank Schubert, researching Buffalo soldiers through the 80s and 90s, continued pulling the archive open. During 1999's Santiago Centennial, a commemorative event was organized at Fort Myer. Some descendants of the black regulars attended. Major newspapers ran small items. A century of journalistic repetition had already solidified Roosevelt's version. A single ceremony could not displace it. The National Park Service updated its battlefield interpretive materials in 2004, acknowledging the United States colored troops' role with greater clarity, a meaningful revision. Most visitors to Kettle Hill today are unaware it happened. Here is a specific number. Fewer than 12% of American school curricula included the black regulars as named participants in the Santiago campaign as of the 2000 through 2010 period examined. Most accounts still center Roosevelt's charge as the defining moment. That gap between 88% and 12% was not produced by a lack of evidence. The evidence was always there. It was produced by a century of institutional decisions about which version received resources. Those 12% represent real classrooms, real educators, real students who graduated knowing something true. 12% is not nothing, but it is not enough to reshape what a country believes about who fought for it and who that country chose to honor. Your teachers were not lying. They transmitted what they had been given. And what they had been given was the version that Scribner's magazine helped make standard in 1900.com. 1. The hill is still there. You can walk the slope where the wire was pulled apart. The barbed fencing is long gone. The summit holds a quiet view of Santiago. The physical evidence of what happened has been absorbed back into the land. What remains is paper, military records, valor citations, personal correspondence, commanders' first-hand assessments, a parallel record built by men who understood that if they did not write it down, no one else would. That record exists because they put it there. The black regulars' story, 9th and 10th Cavalry, 24th and 25th Infantry, was not accidentally forgotten. The silence was not an accident. And the record they left behind is still waiting for the same ground the original claim was given.